Good morning, everyone. It is 11, so we do have two commissioners with us this morning. I know Leslie is here in the office and will be joining shortly. So why don't we go ahead, just in the interest of time, to get started. Commissioners, just to kind of set the stage, we, along with staff, along with Jason and Karen, our lobbyist, would like to discuss this draft aviation bill and get just direction from the board in regards to involvement in the discussions around this bill to date. There have been several discussions, and I'll let Jason expand on that. But just to set the stage, that's what we're hoping to do today. And it is still, as far as I know, Jason, please correct me if I'm wrong, in draft form. And
it was introduced last night.
Okay, perfect. So it is now a bill.
1235. But
Okay, perfect.
the draft that you're looking at is the same as the bill that you started.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Jason. And commissioners, we do have Kym with us this morning. I believe that Joe and Stephanie were planning on joining too, but they were just wrapping up the employee town hall. So I will keep an eye out for them. So with that, Jason, I think I'll turn it over to you, and then we can go from there as far as having staff weigh in on their thoughts on the draft, which is now a bill.
Thanks, Deb. So I think Deb summarized it pretty succinctly. I did participate in a stakeholder meeting on Friday on the bill where some of the airport authorities and others expressed some concerns around a variety of language in the bill that looks more directive than they think the federal government allows. I can highlight those issues for you, but I think maybe hearing from staff would be good. I frankly wanted to check in with you because we are being asked for our feedback and thoughts on the bill. And you know, I've heard from one commissioner, but not the others as far as where you all would like to do it. I hadn't heard back from staff yet, so I felt like we needed to at least talk this out a little bit. So I don't know, Deborah, if having staff give us their thoughts would be the place to go, or if the commissioners want to do something else, please let me know. Otherwise, other thing I could do is just highlight a couple areas of concern that were raised in the stakeholder meeting, if you'd like me to do that.
Yeah, I think that would probably be great to kick us off, Jason.
Okay. On the draft bill on page, or well, I'm sorry, I have the new bill up instead of the draft. Let me pull it. So, starting first issues that were raised at the stakeholder meeting were around particularly some of the definitions, and then on page 8, we really start getting into some of the directive language that they're giving CDPHE, the evaluation and prevention or mitigation of adverse impacts. There's I think a lot of pushback from the airport authorities about whether CDPHE has the authority to try to do prevention or mitigation of these impacts based on the federal law. And that was, so that's on page 8 and on page 9 of the bill. And then again, another section on page 9, to work with the Department of Public Health and Environment to evaluate, prevent, and mitigate the adverse impacts. And then there's another section where it is directing that that you basically take a voluntary program and make it mandatory. There was also a lot of discussion around the addition of 2 new board members and how that might change the focus of the board from less statewide and more just focused on Rockland Airport and Centennial. And then there was a lot of discussion around the cost and necessity of the enterprise altogether. I know that the higher ed institutions that have aviation programs are looking at that part of the bill to try to judge what potential costs there might be there as well. But again, so again, I give you another example. If you look at page 15, shall work together to evaluate, prevent, and mitigate the adverse impact of noise and lead aviation. So I'm not sure how the department does a voluntary program that seeks to prevent and mitigate impacts. Those were some of the key discussions of the stakeholder group and feedback that they got. I really didn't say much of anything except ask for 2-3 questions as to why they had put that language in there. It didn't feel like, based on lack of input so far, that that I couldn't really weigh in for the county. So Karen and I definitely need direction from you all as to where you want to go on this bill.
Share concerns that we have with this bill?
Yes, please. Go ahead, Kym.
Okay, so commissioners, I consulted with our outside aviation expert counsel, and here are some items that he noted for us. He said the noise restrictions are an improper, off-the-book attempt to avoid the requirements of the Airport Noise and Capacity Act without the airport complying with 14 CRF Part 150, so the Part 150 noise study. Says, in other words, the act requires that airports go through a detailed regulatory process before noise restrictions are imposed. That's federal law. But this draft legislation appears to toss that requirement out and impose its own state-generated requirements that are preempted by federal law. So that's one issue. We definitely have preemption there. While it would be okay to require an airport sponsor to provide a plan for eliminating fuel, but that limitation cannot precede the FAA adoption of the type of unleaded fuel to use in general aviation aircraft, and the introduction of a suitable distribution structure such that the airport is able to acquire the approved unleaded fuel in sufficient quantities. And I know that's something that when the airport has spoken about the transition to unleaded fuel, those are things that they have already noted, that you have to have the infrastructure and there has to be sufficient amounts of that unleaded fuel for all of the airports to purchase. And he also indicated that Section 8 can require the airport to sponsor to adopt a plan for phasing out, but that the January 1, 2026 deadline applies to the adoption of the plan and not to when the prohibition of sale of leaded gas will go into effect. So again, it's not problematic to require them to provide a plan. It just can't be inconsistent with what the FAA's requirements are. Also, the legislation cannot preclude the county from offering airport availability for general aviation that currently requires leaded fuel and for pilot training schools, and it cannot require the sponsor county to agree to honor aviation easements unless those easements are found to be legal and applicable. It's wrong in Section 7C to condition the ability of the airport sponsor to apply for federal funds if that's what is intended. He said he wasn't sure if that's what they were trying to do there, but if they were, then that you can't do that. If the county determines that federal funds are needed to operate the airport properly and safely, then there's no basis for a state prohibition against the sponsor doing so. And to the contrary, failure to seek needed funding may be a grant assurance violation. And so he cited a couple different grant assurances that would be problematic for. And those are just kind of the high level issues that he identified with the current draft. And I'm happy to provide our lobbyists with a summary of this and the specific grant assurances that he pointed out are problematic.
It would be great if you could. Sorry.
Are there any other staff comments we need to hear before we dive into a conversation about this? Kym, that was really helpful as an overview, but is there anyone from the airport who's on, anyone else related to this work who wants to provide input?
This is Stephanie Corbo. I'm here from the airport, but I think Kym's comments mostly cover what I would share. Thank you.
With Jefferson County Public Health, and I'm just here to answer any questions, or at least kind of seeking any guidance as to commissioner issues around public health concerns with the use of leaded fuels.
Jim, are there any major takeaways from you based on your reading of the bill, what you heard Kym talk about, the concern among the community, and the desire to see us move toward unleaded fuels sooner? Anything you'd weigh in on from JCPH?
Let me pull my video up. So I'm looking at you and you're looking at me. I think for my take on the bill is that it's trying to address the issues that folks have raised around the use of leaded fuels. The bit of research that I've been able to do back in 2021, Tri-County Health was working with, I believe, either Douglas or Arapahoe counties around this leaded fuels issue. Back, I think it was 2010 or 2011 to 2014, the state health department did some air quality monitoring at Centennial Airport that ultimately indicated that there wasn't a lead issue outside the airport property, although they did identify that during run-up and in certain parts of the airport there would be expected, and there was higher levels of lead in the emissions, but nothing that would have affected offsite as I understood their report. So there hasn't been, to my knowledge, similar studies or work done at the Rocky Mountain Metro Airport. So if there was funding that was created through this bill to be able to do those types of studies, it might be helpful in the long run to understand any potential public health issue that could be related to airport operations. But to my knowledge, that doesn't exist right now, Leslie.
May I just make a comment around unleaded fuel, please? So currently, the University of North Dakota, they're doing testing around unleaded fuel. It's unleaded 94. And they experienced an engine valve recession. And so there still are studies around the unleaded fuel and the safety of that for transition for the piston engines. So I just wanted to share that. And currently, leaded fuel is, regulated and used in these aircrafts, but we are trying to transition to unleaded. The owners of aircraft and flight schools do want to make sure that it is safe. So they're willing to convert some of their aircraft to get started, but they also want to get the results back from the University of North Dakota's study, and they're in the process of that now. And this last information I had with their recession, the engine valve recession issue was on December 2nd of 23, just to give you a timestamp.
Great, thank you. Any other staff input at this time?
So I have a question to ask Jason if we're done with staff input. Is that okay, Andy?
Please go ahead.
So Jason, and Karen, on the meeting on Friday, did they talk about the federal preemption issue? Because there's a number of places in here that feel like it's in contradiction to what we've heard from the FAA. Has there been any consultation with the FAA by the sponsors? Was there conversation about the contradictions with the FAA?
Yes, there was a lot of conversation about the potential preemption issues that are in this bill. And I wouldn't say that there was particular agreement. What Kym has shared was more detailed as far as the kind of the legal analysis of it than some of the conversation that we had at the stakeholder meeting. So I got those comments last night, so I look forward to going and talking to Representative Brown about that, assuming that's my direction. To do that, I think they generally are disagree and are trying to push the envelope as much as they can. And at some point I can envision having to have a conversation to be with the Attorney General's office about this, or Ledge Council, to actually get a unbiased opinion in the views of the sponsors on those preemption issues. And it's something we're probably going to have to work with and try to explore with the AG's office. That's what we need to do as well.
And do we need to set up a meeting with the FAA? I know that Kyle sat on the Community Noise Roundtable. He was aware of the restrictions with the FAA. I'm not sure what happened since our meeting with him. Do we need to set up a meeting with Kyle?
Yeah, happy to do that. There was no one specifically from the FAA at the meeting, but I can't speak to whether the sponsors have talked to them directly yet, because I haven't asked that question of them. Just not knowing exactly what you all wanted to do, I didn't want to go wade into a variety of things within the until a little more direction.
Gotcha.
And Commissioner Kraft-Tharp, you may recall that community meeting that AG Weiser and a number of other state legislators had. Following that meeting, a group of airport representatives from not just our airport, but from Centennial and other local airports, as well as myself, we met with the Attorney General and some of his staff, and we talked through this. And he was also provided a lot of information about the federal preemption issues. So we did have that meeting following that community meeting with him.
It's just baffling to me that we could, I would think that staff, when they drafted the bill, would understand the federal preemption issues.
One would hope.
That's what's feeling confusing to me.
Yeah, I think, it's interesting, Tracy, as I'm listening to your questions and some of the responses, I think the biggest, I still have a number of questions about the bill, right? We're reviewing it for the first time and walking through it. I think the issues are the right kinds of issues, moving to unleaded fuel, tackling noise, no question about it. And I think above all, we as Jefferson County very much want to be part of the conversation. We want to collaborate, partner, shape this bill in a way that's best for our community, acknowledges the concerns they're raising, and also keeping in mind all those really important issues you've raised about the FAA. And I guess, Jason, my biggest question for you is, what do we know about how this bill was developed? Who was at the table? That's sort of part one. And then part two is, for me, it's more about, yes, we're moving in the right direction, but how do we do a stakeholder process to ensure that we're tackling all the issues we heard Kym talk about, the questions Tracy has raised, and Jim's point and perspective from JCPH? So do we know anything about how the bill was designed? And then can we look at some sort of, if Tracy and Andy agree, some sort of stakeholdering process so we have the right partners around the table to tackle just, some of the very issues that have been raised in this conversation?
I know that the bill sponsors have worked with various members of the community, as well as Boulder County. They have met. I know before the last stakeholder meeting, I know that they had met with some of the airport authority associations several times on that. And I think fundamentally where we're ending up right now is a disagreement over the legalities within parts of this bill, right? So, I like to say every once in a while you put two lawyers in a room to get four opinions. And I think we've got a little bit of that going on as well. Representative Brown has, certainly indicated that there's some language in here, for example, that the Senate President very much wanted that sounds much more directive than perhaps folks think it should be based on the preemption issues. For example, I did ask him yesterday about certain provisions and why he had written them that way. I don't know how you enforce a voluntary program, for example. And there's language in the bill that says that.
Right.
And I just kept asking him, tell me again how you enforce a voluntary program. That can't be, that can't comply with federal law. And he admitted that President Schönberg had pushed for that language to be in the bill, for example. So, and again, I've been participating as much as I can in the process part of this without giving an opinion because, once again, with draft bills and all that stuff. And so I wanted to highlight particular potential issues but not get too aggressive about it just yet, right? But I think we're at the point now where we're going to need to either advocate for amendments or oppose the bill or support the bill, depending on where direction you all have. Representative Brown has asked, has made it clear that he is willing to continue to talk and do amendments to the bill. Again, I can't guarantee you how much room he actually will give on that, but I think it's incumbent on us to do that. I will tell you over the weekend, one of the associations put out an action alert to oppose the bill before it was introduced, or as it just had been introduced, I guess, just for the process. I actually shared that with Tracy Kraft-Tharp. That didn't go over very well, with the bill sponsors who were responding back, let's just say, expressing their displeasure at that. And, I did at least let them know that we were still taking in feedback and had not taken a formal position from the board yet on the bill. But that's kind of the other reason why I wanted to get this ahead of our next meeting, because I feel like we need to start working this now if we're going to affect the bill or be part of the process more than we have to.
Leslie, we had a meeting with Kyle Brown pretty early on. Jason, the airport authority, their lobbyists, and talked about the general intent of the bill. And Kyle had said that his intention was to help airports to be able to move towards the transition pretty quickly by doing either a tax incentive or a grant program. Some of this new stuff is new stuff, and it sounds like you're right. That might be some of the new sponsors that have come in. My concern is that we're just going to end up in court forever, because we can't comply with things that the FAA is saying we cannot comply to. I mean, we're going to be caught in the middle between the state and the feds is what's going to happen.
But I agree. And I also think it's important for us to get some perspective from the FAA so we can weave that into the conversation. And now that we've got a bill in front of us, I do wonder if it wouldn't be of value to bring some of those key stakeholders together. And Tracy and Andy, there may be others to add to that list as well, perhaps a representative from the AG's office or others. Actually, maybe the AG was part of that earlier conversation. Apologies. But I think now that we've got something to work with, and it seems, as you pointed out, there's some additional layers to it, let's unpack that and collaborate together on what this bill looks like moving forward.
And I thought that the letter from the airport director at Centennial was exceptional. And Jason, was he at the meeting on Friday?
Yes.
And was he as exceptional as he was in written form?
Yeah, and again, I think the bill sponsors are skeptical of some of the legal analysis, is maybe is the nice way of saying it right now, and they really couldn't argue, but they continue to say we'll continue to look at the preemption issues. So again, they were trying to hold off on that discussion, but I think that's going to be the key issue. Is a bunch of lawyers are going to have to get in the room with them and walk them through the potential problems that this will entail for the airport if they go forward with this.
This is Deborah. If I could just weigh in real quick. I chatted, Joe just very quickly went by my desk this morning. He did share with me that he's been in contact with our local FAA rep, John Bauer. And if there's any conversations that the board would like to involve him in or an ask of them, we just need to submit a letter to him, just a written request. So I just wanted to share that with the group too, that is an option should the board want to.
Thanks, Deb. Andy, do you have any comments, questions, any ideas, next steps?
Yeah. So here, as I read through the bill, absolutely support the obvious intent of reducing and eventually eliminating leaded fuel, working with communities on noise, and having state and federal money coming into the airports to help with those transitions and everything. I think some of the possible overlap or the fact that some of the things in the bill we're fairly certain go against federal law is obviously an issue. And here's my thing too. And I absolutely support this idea of stakeholdering and getting folks together and talking about it. But I really think that this is between the legislators who are carrying this bill, the drafter of the bill, and the FAA are the ones who have to figure where that line is. I mean, we can ask the FAA. I mean, the FAA is going to get involved in this. And the reason why I think that the sponsors of the bill are incentivized to do that already is that if this bill passes the way it is and there's some obvious conflict with federal law, it's going to go to court. And I know people, well, we'll just have the attorney general defend the bill. That is going to draw the process out. I think we all support the intents of this bill and want it to happen sooner rather than later. So I think that's an obvious incentive for the sponsors to find out where this line is between what the state can do and what FAA and federal law will allow the state to do. Find where that line is. And I think that's a piece where, we as the county have been struggling to find that line where what we can do as a county versus what FAA what they insist, what federal law says. So, I'm excited that this bill is going to help define that line, and I think the sponsors should be incentivized to figure that out sooner rather than later, and not let this just go through the way it is, and depend on court cases to figure that out, because that's just going to delay the process. So my sense is that it's less about us getting involved, just making sure that the sponsors are sitting down with the feds and figuring out where that line needs to be.
I agree with you, and I think that's a really good point. So I don't think it should be us pulling together stakeholder groups. I don't think we need to take the lead on this. I think you're right, Andy. I think this is between the FAA and the legislators. And if they don't know them and we can help connect people, then that's fine. But we're just caught in the middle. We have to figure out, what we can comply with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that, we should completely sit on the sidelines and do nothing.
No,
I definitely want our folks, like Jason seems to already be quite involved in this, and I definitely, but and I think we should, we should take action on the bill. I think, and my suggestion, I definitely don't think we should oppose the bill. I don't think we're quite at a point where we can just say support.
Right.
So that leaves, monitor or amend. I think there's some obvious places where we think the bill needs to be amended, but I don't think I hate to say, let's be in an amend position if we don't know exactly what we want to amend. So
I think we need to be in an amend position. And I think that there's things that Jason has outlined and the Centennial Airport director has outlined. For example, we have a voluntary noise abatement program. According to this, we would need to enforce a voluntary program. I don't know how you do that. So that is one thing that needs to be amended.
Commissioners, I would
Just one
So,
quick thought too, to build on the comments that have been made. Yes, I do think we need to be proactive. Agreed. I don't think that we necessarily are in the middle of this, given that it's a conversation between the FAA and the legislators. And I just don't want us to sit back. So I think we're all on the same page there. I wonder if, in terms of the amend versus a monitor position, if Kym, there's some additional points that you can share, with Jason, with us, on kind of, where those amendments would lie. Tracy, you had just mentioned the one recommendation, for example. So what else would we want to put on the table to ensure we're collaborating in the sense of, in this case, here's a heads up of some things to consider just based on our experience. So are there other key amendments we can speak to right now, or would that be something we'd need to take a day or two to kind of flesh out? I guess I'm
based on the
asking Kym.
comments I've seen from Kym and from the other airport authorities, there's some things that I don't know that I guess I'd have to ask the question, do you really care about? Like, for example, the pushback on the additions to the board. Like, I think that's an issue for others, unless you all are telling me that you deeply care about whether someone from the Rocky Mountain, airport area or from the Centennial area be on that board. That was one that others were pushing back on. I do think that there's some of the directive language I've already identified, that Kym identified, would be some places where we would have discussion, and kind of already, at least Representative Brown said, I'm guessing these will be the things that I'm going to hear about, which is frankly what I've heard about from Kym. So I think those are the areas, and I would say I'm a little worried that the interaction between the airport authorities and the bill sponsors has gone a little sideways, and that I'd like to, if we were in an amend position, they'll probably end up being, in a spot of being the more moderate voice in that discussion, which is probably a good thing for the county. That they're actually trying to, try to help with the bill as opposed to just opposing it, which is where I think some of the groups are lining up.
And Jason, just really quickly, I was in a meeting, I don't remember when it was, but there's a guy from the state, I think the Aeronautical Board, that had concerns with the addition of 2 members that are just specific to like a high density area, because their view is they're a statewide and it would be giving too much voice to those jurisdictions. But I agree with you, that's probably their battle to have, not ours.
I mean, so I definitely work with the airport folks and Kym on specifics. Those are the, I think, really making this, getting the information from public health around potential impacts, I think is important, and something that I'm hearing you all share that we should continue to work on. It's some of the way that they've written these things to make it sound like you're, for example, mandating a voluntary program, things like that, that I think we'd be focused on amendments.
And on the table here, and I think we've got just a half hour for this call, is we've got a recommendation of monitor. We have a recommendation of amend. It sounds like we have a few amendments that we'd like to see, and there's some additional components we're working on. Andy, do you have any concerns about moving to an amend position, knowing, for example, that there was one example given of where we'd like to amend, and there are likely others that will continue to flesh out with Jason and Kym?
No, I just, what I want to make sure is that we don't end up moving goalposts. We don't know exactly what our goal, we've mentioned a couple of things that we definitely want to amend, but there's some other things that we're going to work on. I just want to be clear, make sure that it's communicated to the sponsors that we don't, that we're still working on some stuff. So just because they take like the two amendments that we've talked about so far that we're interested in, if they were to amend those, that doesn't automatically put us into a support position because we may have some other issues. And I just know that that's come up at CCI a couple of times where we go into an amend position, the amendments are done, and then all of a sudden people are talking, well, we need to amend this too. And it's like, well, that's not what we said. So I just want to make it clear that this is not our full list of potential amendments. And just this idea that we very much want to move in a direction of supporting this bill because the overall intent is exactly what we as Jefferson County, the direction we want to go in. We just want to make sure it's done right.
And we're not in court for the next decade.
Right, exactly.
Spending taxpayer dollars, right? Okay. Jason, is there anything more you need from us on this?
So I will be letting them know that we're in an amend position, and I will work with Kym and the rest of the staff to flesh out those amendments a little bit more. I think the feedback I already got is a good start on that. And I think Representative Brown will appreciate that as well.